Those scriptural promises pretended for the Church's infallibility, either they do of themselves without the Church's sense and exposition evidently and solidly prove the point they are brought for, or they do not. If they say they do, then other passages of Scripture, undoubtedly far more plain and positive for diverse doctrines rejected by the Papists, do of themselves without the Church's sense and exposition prove those points they are brought for, and so Scripture may decide controversies. If they say not, then the Church's infallibility must be supposed before it can be proved from those texts, which is, I confess, agreeable to the Roman Catholic way of disputation, and fit for them that cannot endure reason should be a judge. But I am sure it will never satisfy any man that hath any care of his conscience or salvation. But I can tell the reader good news, and that which is strange too among Romanists, who use to confute Protestants by the mere naming of those texts that have been substantially vindicated 100 times. Mr. Cressy hath one chapter entitled, The Validity of Such Texts. So it is called. But I doubt it was the printer's mistake for invalidity, as will appear upon perusal. He offers but one argument for proof of this capital assertion upon which all the papacy depends, and it is this. The ancient fathers do usually argue against their heretics and schismatics from those promises that Christ's church should continue forever, and that the gates of hell should not prevail against her. Now, saith he, if these promises of Christ be not infallible and absolute, and that church visible, what then? Then woe to the poor fathers. Then the writings of these fathers will prove to be the most foolish, impertinent, juggling, yea, blasphemous and pernicious discourses that ever were. So Cressy, in section 2, chapter 28. That is to say, if we take the notion out of this odious dress, they used fallacious arguments. Very good. And is this that satisfied Mr. Cressy's conscience? Oh, the modesty of you, man. Of the man, excuse me. You see, a little thing satisfies him. But if he will cheat himself, let him not think to cheat us with such ridiculous arguments. First, the utmost of what would follow is that the ancient fathers, whose writings are extant, were fallible and liable to mistakes, a proposition which I have formerly proved, and the popish doctors themselves agree with us therein. I suppose Mr. Cressy will not differ. Number 2. Secondly, if upon every impertinent and unconcluding argument produced by fathers, councils, or popes against supposed heretics, I should make this inference, that they were all jugglers, blasphemers, etc., Mr. Cressy would think it a very harsh censure. When their great lords and masters argue at this rate, as he knows who did, arise, Peter, kill and eat. And here are 2 swords, ergo, the Pope hath civil and spiritual power over men. They that are in the flesh cannot please God. Priests should not be married. God made man after his own image. Images are lawful. Will Mr. Cressy now say these were all jugglers, blasphemers, etc., and their writings the most foolish, impertinent, pernicious discourses that ever were? Either then let Mr. Cressy qualify his censure there, or apply it here. Thirdly, if the fathers were supposed infallible, yet they might use impertinent and unconcluding arguments. You must remember our masters, the Romanists, while they assert the infallibility of the Pope and Council, they cautiously distinguish between the conclusion and the mediums or arguments to prove it. I will only mind you of him whom they all so highly approve and applaud, that is, Stapleton, whom Mr. Cressy follows, and the rest of them, who, as you saw, limits this infallibility to the conclusion, not to the premises or argument. So if the fathers were infallible, as you see, and the papists confess they are not, yet this being only in the conclusion, it will not at all secure them from impertinency and error in their arguments or mediums used to confirm the conclusions, which is all that this discourse of Mr. Cressy pretends to prove. So now judge whether the printer was not a knave, for sure the author could not be so, since he is a Benedictine, to set in the front of this argument the validity, etc. But you know, non omnia possumus omnis. Peradventure Mr. Cressy is a better respondent than opponent. And though he cannot at all prove his own assertion, yet he will at least solidly answer his adversaries. But alas, here he is so jejune, that it moves my pity. For when Mr. Chillingworth pleaded for these promises, that these promises, were only conditional if Christians should make use of God's means, the Church should continue. Hereto, saith Cressy, when attended with an easy conscience, first, there is no warrant from any circumstance in those texts for such a new interpretation. I will not engage in that argument, only I will refer a parallel place to his consideration. It is said, particularly concerning Jerusalem, which never was said concerning Rome, I have hallowed this house, to put my name therein forever, and mine eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. 1 Kings 9, verse 3. And it is again repeated concerning that house that the Lord had said, In Jerusalem shall my name be forever. 2 Chronicles 3, verses 3 and 4. Then, if he have a conscience, let him answer whether there be not as much warrant from these texts to prove this promise to Jerusalem to be infallible and unconditional, which they grant it was not, as from the other texts to prove them to be so to the Church of Rome. He needs not take day to answer it. His second answer is wholly ad hominem, and other, you will say, was little ad rem. That Mr. Chillingworth applies this to future times only, not to past or present, and therefore it concerns not the dispute in hand about the Roman Catholic Church, which all English Protestants acknowledge to be a true Church of Christ. Just so they would persuade their proselytes that all Protestants grant that theirs is a false way, and salvation to be had ordinarily in the communion of their church, whereas neither the one nor the other are true. But what if Protestants do, and Mr. Chillingworth did grant their church to be a true church, doth it therefore follow these texts were pertinently alleged to prove it? Or did Mr. Chillingworth say these promises were absolute for time, past or present, and conditional only for the future? No such matter. But these are only his own dreams and shufflings, who, pro more, when he cannot answer his adversary, endeavors to blind his reader. I have only one thing more to observe upon that which he tells us Mr. Chillingworth saw it, that if there were such promises of indefectibility, none could challenge them but the Roman Church, since she only claims them, all others lay down their claim. But that also is no more solid than the rest, for since this promise of indefectibility is general and indefinite, it no more belongs to Rome than to any other particular church. Neither have they any more interest in the promise, because they boldly claim the monopoly of it, since an usurper's claim gives him no just title to the thing. Nor have other churches the less interest in it, because their conscience and modesty will not suffer them to appropriate it to themselves. For though they extend this promise of indefectibility to the whole church, yet they reap the comfort and benefit of it, inasmuch as they are the true members of that church, and not upon any local or particular consideration. There is a fourth argument behind, taken from the tradition or testimony of the present church, but this I have discoursed at large, and I hope discovered the folly of that new device. Thither I refer the reader.